We've had the Cuban embargo for 54 years here in America. And it was this close to working before Obama went and screwed it up. Who thinks that? Who thinks it was on the precipice of working? All right, so news coming out of the administration that we actually have some sort of deal with the Cubans. Now, it's not like the embargo has been lifted. It has not, okay? There's still a lot of restrictions. I'm going to explain all that to you. But let me go back in time a little bit here to about a year ago when we had, what gate were they called? Handshake gate. Remember when President Obama shook hands with Raul Castro when there were other international leaders? That was shocking. And how dare he treat him like a human being? He should have spit in his eye. Okay, now, at the time, John McCain had said, I mean, what's the point? Neville Chamberlain shook hands with Hitler. A little much? Actually, later, McCain went on to say, yeah, that was too much. Sorry, a bit of an exaggeration. Okay, but he also said this at that time. Why should you shake hands with someone who's keeping Americans in prison? John, we have our answer today. It's to get them out. Alan Gross was being kept in prison in Cuba. He has been released. Oh, that's why you talk to people who don't agree with you. You talk to your enemies, because those are the guys you're going to make a deal with. Because it's easy to talk to your allies. You can agree all day long about wonderful things that you're both completely sure of. That isn't the tricky part. The tricky part is talk to people you don't agree with so you can get some sort of deal. In this case, Alan Gross, who was being kept in prison for over 5 years in Cuba, who's a U.S. citizen, has now been released. Now, I'm going to tell you all about him as well. He actually turned out to be a guy who was working with USAID. Now, those are guys who actually wanted to make sure that they got around the censorship in Cuba. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Alan Gross. He was trying to get more interconnectivity, specifically for the Jewish community in Cuba. Who knew? Well, actually, I knew because I had a friend in Miami who used to call himself a Cuban. So yes, there are Jewish Cubans, right? But mainly to get around the censorship. Now, the Cuban government is totally against USAID, and they think that it works with the American government to undermine their regime, and they're the ones who put in the censorship. So Alan Gross was breaking those laws, and so they put him in jail. Now, that was the risk that Alan was taking, and we love him for taking that risk and for making that effort, because we're against the censorship in Cuba. We're against the government of Cuba overall. I am. I think that it's not like communism worked either. It's not like, 54 years later, they're on the precipice of succeeding. They are not at all. If you go to Cuba, you'll see, as Ben Mankiewicz often says, co-host here on the Young Turks, the entire country seems like frozen in time in the 1950s. And the entire country also needs a new coat of paint, okay? Now, look, that's partly because of our sanctions. So our sanctions did not topple the Castro regime. The Castros have been in charge that entire time. It didn't work. It didn't work. What it did do was cause a lot of suffering for the Cuban people. And if you care about Cuba and you want to liberate them, it's not the best way to go about accomplishing your objectives. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. So it was time for a change. So here's President Obama announcing that change.
We will end an outdated approach that for decades has failed to advance our interests, and instead, we will begin to normalize relations between our two countries. Through these changes, we intend to create more opportunities for the American and Cuban people. Neither the American nor Cuban people are well served by a rigid policy that's rooted in events that took place before most of us were born. With the changes I'm announcing today, it will be easier for Americans to travel to Cuba, and Americans will be able to use American credit and debit cards on the island. Nobody represents America's values better than the American people, and I believe this contact will ultimately do more to empower the Cuban people. But I'm under no illusion about the continued barriers to freedom that remain for ordinary Cubans. The United States believes that no Cuban should face harassment or arrest or beatings simply because they're exercising a universal right to have their voices heard. And we will continue to support civil society there. Moreover, given Cuba's history, I expect it will continue to pursue foreign policies that will at times be sharply at odds with American interests. I do not expect the changes I'm announcing today to bring about a transformation of Cuban society overnight.
Look, incredibly reasonable statement there and very reasonable action here. And as I saw this morning, I thought, look, this is one of the upsides of having a Democratic president. A Republican president would not have done this. They haven't done it in the past. They wouldn't do it in the future. They just wouldn't have done it. So as much as we get frustrated with President Obama from time to time, or nearly all the time, there are moments like this where you realize it does make a difference. And it's going to make a difference in the lives of a lot of Cubans and us Americans as well. So let me give you more of the details on what this deal is. The U.S. will take steps towards restoring diplomatic ties. The embargo's impact will be eased, but not completely taken away. It takes away some pre-existing, or takes the pre-existing exceptions to the travel ban and expands them. But it doesn't mean that American tourists are welcome. They are not yet, okay? We will be reopening a U.S. embassy in Havana. That's terrific. We have embassies everywhere. Well, we can't have one in Havana. Part of the deal to get Alan Gross out involved releasing 3 Cuban spies that we caught here that were part of the WASP network. Now, a lot of politicians here are complaining, how dare you, you can't release anybody. Now, what you're not hearing a lot about is, first, we got Alan Gross back, and they're pretending that he was just an average citizen who got, kidnapped by the Cuban government. That's not what happened, right? Now, again, I love the work that he was doing, but he was circumventing their laws. That's what he was trying to do. He wasn't an average tourist there. So that's part of the deal. Another is an operative that we had in there that's been in prison for 20 years. The operative is not a U.S. citizen. They have not named him yet, but they are also going to release him. So one of our spies basically gets to go free as well. And 53 political prisoners in Cuba will also be released. So now, the Republicans and Menendez, who's a Democrat, who's another Cuban senator, Cuban-American senator, says, oh, we got nothing out of the deal. That's patently untrue. We actually got a lot out of the deal. Okay, but let's continue on the list here. Easier for Americans to obtain licenses to do business in Cuba. Always got to keep the business going. You heard the credit cards and debit cards you'll be allowed to use in Cuba. Now, you still can't have American tourism, but you can visit for other purposes. And there's a list of the reasons that you can visit there. You can send up to now $2,000 per year to your family in Cuba if you have family there. You can import up to $400 in goods from Cuba, including $100 in alcohol and tobacco. The most important part of that is that means Cuban cigars are back. They are allowed, and so everybody go nuts. People will care about it. I don't care. Who cares? Anyway, the substance of this is far more important. And it'll be the first step, not the final step, the first step toward lifting some U.S. sanctions against Cuba. Now, part of what Cuba's given back to us is all the guys that are being released. It's also allowing citizens broader access to the internet. Of course, not complete access, but much broader access. That's why Alan Gross went in the first place. So not only are they releasing Alan Gross, but they're helping to achieve part of his objective. That's wonderful. And along with the internet comes a lot of new ideas and the beginnings of freedom. That's exactly what we're hoping for, and the fact that they have allowed that is a great step forward. And finally, they'll also allow officials from the United Nations and International Committee of the Red Cross to return to their territory. Okay, all that is very important for the political prisoners that they're holding, among other things. Okay, so we've got a deal. It's a very good deal. I'm very happy about it, and you should be as well. What is absolutely clear is that 54 years of failure was not magically going to turn into success tomorrow. Enough is enough. We know what isn't working. Let's move on to something that is working.